Believe it or not, this is November inside my garden dome in the Colorado mountains. Usually, this is what November looks like outside. But inside the dome, it's a fully tropical environment in here with all of the plants and the pond and fish and the palm tree. Lots of people ask how the dome stays warm enough for all this to survive and grow in November. And the secret is geothermal heat. In our case, geothermal heat is the heat that we're capturing by the hot air from the dome during the daytime. We store that heat using a climate battery. A climate battery is basically a system of underground tubes that stores heat in the soil during the day and then releases it back into the greenhouse at night or whenever the temperatures drop. So we DIY'd ours ourselves, and I'll show you how we put it together. So the first step was a lot of digging, a lot. We excavated the entire floor of the dome several feet down, so we had room for the tubing network. Everything needs to sit deep enough underground where the soil's temperature stays stable. And then the layout. We placed long runs of perforated tubing in a pattern that lets air travel evenly throughout the soil. These pipes are what carry the warm air down underground. And the layout matters. The tubes need to be spaced so that the soil can act as one big connected thermal battery. And there's 2 layers of it. So this is the initial layer, then comes lots of backfill, lots of dirt, spread it all over the first layer, make sure there's plenty of dirt in between the tubing, and then goes the next layer of tubing. And so once all the tubing was connected, that's when we can do the final backfill. That was several more feet of dirt on top of the submerged tubing. Now, these header tubes are what's coming out of the ground, and this is where the fan is installed. Once the dome was completed, these header tubes remain exposed inside of the dome. The taller one being the intake tube to grab that hotter air at the top of the dome, pull it underground. And the fan sits on the lower tube, like the exhaust tube, which is blowing underground air into the dome. The fan has its own thermostat and settings, which can be controlled manually or with presets from an app. The summer setting I designed kicks the fan on as temperatures exceed 80 degrees to start driving that hot air underground. Over time, all of this hot air ends up supercharging the soil with heat, and the entire ground under the dome acts as a giant thermal mass directly beneath the dome, which will slowly release this heat into the dome, especially overnight. But it can also release more rapidly if the fan is turned on directly. Now, in the summertime, the climate battery can also act to cool the dome as the hot air circulates through the climate battery. It will take 120-degree air in through the intake tube and blow out 70-degree air out of the exhaust. Now, the real question I'm sure people are wondering is how well does this actually work? Sounds great in theory, but when it actually starts snowing and freezing, what is happening with temperatures in the dome? Here's a typical graph of dome temperatures on a November day. It can peak around 80 degrees near midday on a sunny day, and then after the sun goes down, you see a steep drop-off all the way down to about 40 degrees in the early pre-dawn hours. I would say this has been typical of most of our October, November fall days. It's been warmer than usual this year with less snow. Our outdoor temperatures have been averaging in the 30s and 40s, so naturally it's been staying above freezing without any extra help from the GAHT system, other than that passive release of heat from deep underground into the dome. What's interesting is what happens on days where it's overcast and cold or when it's windy and freezing at night. The dome doesn't quite warm up as much. Like the other day, it didn't get above 55 in the dome. And the temperature drop-off is still happening. So a few nights ago, the temperatures I noticed were approaching the mid-30s by 9 p.m., not by 6 a.m., early in the evening with a lot of more drop-off to go. So I turned on the GAHT fan using the app remotely, and I let it run all night. Now check out the graph. There was a bump in the temperature that sustained the dome temperatures in the low 40s until the fan shut off at about 6 a.m. No heat was introduced. This was just the air circulation from the underground climate battery. Outside, the temperatures were in the low 20s, and it was really windy all night, so there was definitely drafts coming in with cold air. Now, I need to monitor this test several more times so I can feel comfortable about how much the GAHT can achieve as far as raising that temperature, and when we might have to introduce supplemental heat into the dome. Looking at the upcoming forecast with multiple nights in the teens, we might have to do that. Perhaps run a propane heater for a few hours or just plug in an electric heater. Long term, we might put in a wood stove. So climate battery aside, what are we actually growing here in the dome going into December? Well, starting in our very first garden bed, we've got beets still growing and lots of arugula. I planted that, transplanted it from the raised bed garden outside. I also newly planted some peas and beans, and there's still basil and still tomatoes growing, although everything has slowed down significantly since we've had much less light since the days are getting shorter. But I did spot this brand new pepper that just came out in the last couple of weeks. Back in October, I planted new potatoes, which are looking pretty decent, and I started some herbs a couple of weeks ago, which are just starting to germinate right now. On the other side, I've got kale, which I just harvested, but it totally looked like a huge shrub. 2 kale plants and asparagus. And then I planted some garlic chives, several of those, and some onions. And this is where I put some spinach and also some romaine lettuce. A couple of spinach plants have come up and like a tiny romaine, I think, but I haven't had a lot more pop up out of the ground just yet. So keeping an eye on that section. Those are the cool weather greens. Got some onions growing, and I still have a squash plant that I left. I harvested the last of my squash. I'm letting it cure, but the squash plant was looking really healthy, so I decided to leave it, and there's even a bloom on there. There's actually a couple coming, so we'll see what happens with that. The rest of the dome is primarily growing flowers, trees, and succulents. And honestly, I'm surprised that the flowers keep blooming even with the dwindling daylight. We're only 3 weeks away from the shortest day of the year, so we'll see if the vigorous blooming keeps up. But it's fine by me because I use flowers in my artwork, and it's fun to have real flowers that my art students can use in class when we host it in the dome, even in the winter months. Last night was one of the colder nights so far, with a major Arctic blast from the north that brought snow, high winds, and temperatures in the teens. The dome peaked at 80 degrees yesterday afternoon, and despite the freeze outside, the dome this morning was a cozy 43 degrees, while the wind chill outside was in the single digits. But what I'm worried about in the forecast is tomorrow's forecast, where it's supposed to be snowing and overcast the entire day. I don't know that we'll be able to get temperatures much above 60 degrees in the dome. And look at those lows overnight, 18 degrees in the teens, a couple of days, even next Wednesday, something similar. So these are the days where the GAHT might come in handy, running that fan, the climate battery, generating a little bit more warmth, or we might have to use supplemental heat. And this is our very first year with the dome, so I'm curious to see what's possible, especially over the next few winter months. Should I try to grow more flowers? Maybe give hydroponics a try in the dome? Or once we get the solar power connected, I might try to add some grow lights. And if this was your dome, what would you try next? You're invited to follow along and see how we utilize this space over the next few months and enjoy some garden cozy vibes throughout the snowy winter.